Thank you for tuning in to Module 2 in the 2025 Municipal Affairs Election Training Program. This module will focus on nominations, since the nomination period will be on us in just a few short weeks. As a bit of a disclaimer, this video is intended as an introduction and overview of some of the things you need to know as a returning officer. This presentation does not provide a comprehensive review of the legislation and is not legal advice. If you have questions about how the legislation applies to specific facts, make sure to get advice from your legal counsel. If you watched our Module 1 presentation, you already know that our 2025 training will be delivered in pre-recorded videos and posted to the Municipal Affairs website throughout the election year. If you haven't watched the Module 1 presentation, please take some time to watch it, as it includes some important information on resources, roles and responsibilities, and election-related resolutions and bylaws. Modules 3 and 4 will be posted later this winter, with Modules 5 and 6 coming in the spring. The remaining modules will be made available over the course of the spring and summer 2025, including an elections database presentation and specialized training for summer villages. In Module 2, we'll be focusing on nominations. This will include a summary of notice requirements, candidate eligibility, a discussion of the necessary nomination papers, and we'll touch on withdrawals, acclamations, the notice of election, and some additional post-nomination day processes. If you watch the Module 1 video, you're already aware of the new notice of intent requirements in the Local Authorities Election Act. However, it's important to reiterate this new step, as many prospective candidates may not be aware of the requirement. If a prospective candidate hasn't registered with your local jurisdiction yet, make sure that they do so at the time you provide them with their nomination package, which we'll discuss in more detail later. Written notice under Section 147.22 must include the full name, address, and contact information of the individual, the address of the place or places where records of the individual are maintained, and of the place to which communications may be addressed, the names and addresses of the financial institutions to be used by or on behalf of the individual as depositories for campaign contributions made to that individual, and the names of the signing authorities for each depository. Remember that notice under Section 147.22 is not the same as a nomination, and both nominees and those who still only intend to be nominated are obligated to give their written notice of intention to the local jurisdiction. Let's talk about eligibility. Eligibility under Section 21 of the Local Authorities Election Act. A person may be nominated if they're eligible to vote, and eligibility is explained in Section 47, which states a person is eligible to vote under the Act if the person is at least 18, a Canadian citizen, and lives in Alberta, and the person's place of residence is in the local jurisdiction on election day. Section 22 explains ineligibility. A person is ineligible if the person is the auditor of the local jurisdiction, the person is an employee of the local jurisdiction, unless the person has taken a leave of absence, the person is indebted to the municipality for taxes in default exceeding $50, excluding indebtedness for current taxes and indebtedness for arrears of taxes for which the person has entered into a consolidation agreement with the municipality. If the person is indebted to the local jurisdiction for any debt equaling or exceeding $500 and is in default for more than 90 days, if the person has, within the previous 10 years, been convicted of an offense under the LAEA, the Election Act, and the Election Finances and Contributions Disclosure Act, or the Canada Elections Act. A person is also ineligible if they failed to comply with the campaign finance and disclosure requirements of the Local Authorities Election Act, and the Chief Administrative Officer, also known as the Secretary, has presented or transmitted a report to Council about the failure to comply, and the court did not dispense with or extend the time for compliance. A person is deemed to be ineligible in these circumstances for either an 8-year period following the day that a report was presented or transmitted by the Secretary or the CAO, or a 3-year period following the day the disclosure statement was filed with the municipality, whichever period expires first. Also, in case you're wondering about school board elections, employees of a school division, charter school, or private school are not eligible to be nominated unless they take a leave of absence. Note as well that a person is not deemed ineligible by reason only that they've been appointed to a position under the Emergency Management Act, that they've received a gratuity or allowance for services on a committee or board appointed by or responsible to the local jurisdiction, or that the person is a volunteer fire chief, officer, or member of a fire, ambulance, or emergency measures organization in the municipality, or the person is a volunteer for any other purpose. An employee of the Office of the Ombudsman must also take a leave of absence in order to be eligible for nomination. For summer villages, a person is eligible if they are entitled to vote and have been a resident of Alberta for 12 months preceding election day. The ineligibility criteria would also still apply in a summer village. Please also keep in mind that this is an overview of the eligibility and ineligibility provisions in the Local Authorities Election Act. Please read these sections carefully and make sure you understand how eligibility is determined. Let's talk a little bit more about the nomination process. Notice of nomination day must be provided within the municipality by publishing a notice in a newspaper or publication circulating in the area for at least once a week in each of the 2 consecutive weeks prior to nomination day. For 2025, nomination day is September 22nd. The returning officer can also mail or deliver notice to every residence at least 1 week before nomination day. If a municipality has passed an advertising bylaw under Section 606.1 of the MGA, the provisions of that bylaw may apply to advertising notice of nomination day. A returning officer may give additional notice by any other method as many times as considered appropriate. This may include the additional use of municipal websites or social media pages. Notice of nomination day is in Form 3 under the Local Authorities Election Forms Regulation. The notice of nomination will include the name of the municipality, the date of the nomination day, and the times that nominations will be accepted. The notice must contain the offices for which the election is being held, the number of vacancies required to be filled, in addition to any ward or subdivision number. Ensure that you include the address of the office where nominations will be accepted, along with any additional locations if a bylaw has been passed to allow for that. Finally, ensure that the notice has been dated and signed by the returning officer. Filing nomination papers. Pursuant to Section 25, the nomination period starts on January 1st, 2025, and runs until 4 weeks prior to Election Day. Again, September 22nd, 2025. Section 27 sets out the requirements for nominations, including the necessary forms. Form 4 is the nomination paper and candidate's acceptance. Form 4 needs to be signed by at least 5 eligible electors and must be sworn or affirmed by the candidate. In the case of a jurisdiction with wards, only an elector who is a resident of the ward in which a candidate is being nominated may sign the nomination papers. In addition to the candidate's acceptance, the candidate financial information form, Form 5, must also be filed with the nomination papers. It's also a good idea to give prospective candidates Form 26, the campaign disclosure statement and financial statement, when they pick up their nomination package, and quickly review with the prospective candidate their disclosure obligations under Section 147.4 of the Local Authorities Election Act. Section 28 provides that nominations shall be submitted at the local jurisdiction office at any time during the nomination period. Section 28 does not require the candidate to file in person, but make sure prospective candidates are aware that their papers need to be complete before they will be accepted. If the paper is not completed, for example, if it does not have the required signatures or is not accompanied with a deposit, if necessary, the returning officer will be obligated to reject the nomination. There is bylaw making authority under Section 28 to establish additional locations for the purpose of filing nomination papers. So make sure to check if you have such a bylaw in place. Section 28 sub 4 outlines the situations in which a returning officer will be obligated to reject nomination papers. 1, if the nomination is not in the prescribed form. 2, if the nomination is not signed by the minimum number of electors. 3, if the nomination is not sworn or affirmed by the nominee. 4, if the nomination does not include a criminal record check, if your municipality has passed a bylaw. And if the nomination is not accompanied by a deposit, if your municipality has passed a bylaw requiring one. If the nomination has not been rejected, Section 28 sub 5 states the returning officer must sign the form to indicate it's been accepted. Note, the returning officer does not have the authority to challenge the validity of the information provided on the nomination papers. The ability to question the eligibility of a candidate or to enforce disqualification is left to the electors of the municipality or council through the enforcement of disqualification provisions in Section 175 of the MGA. Summer Village Nomination Day. Summer villages do not have the same nomination period as other municipalities. Section 12 states that nomination day is in either June or July, or both June and July, at the date, time, and place established by resolution of council. The election day is then 4 weeks after the day established by council for the receipt of nominations for that election. And here's a bit of a nomination form checklist. Make sure that the nomination is completed in the prescribed form, is signed by at least the minimum number of persons required to sign the nomination, that has been sworn or affirmed by the person nominated, and is accompanied by a criminal record check and deposit if required by bylaw.
Please ensure you are referring to the May 15, 2025 version of the LAEA when conducting this election, as significant changes to the nomination process have been made as of that date. Sections 29 and 30 provide for nomination deposits. A municipality may establish by bylaw passed prior to December 31st of the year before a year in which a general election is to be held, a deposit amount, which must accompany the nomination papers at the time of filing. The deposit, in the case of a municipality with a population of more than 10,000, may not exceed $1,000. In all other cases, the deposit may not exceed $100. The deposits shall be returned if the candidate is elected, if the candidate obtains votes equaling at least half of the total number of votes cast for the candidate elected to the office with the least number of votes, or if the candidate withdraws as a candidate in accordance with Section 32. If a candidate dies before the closing of voting stations on election day, the deposit must be returned to the candidate's estate. If a candidate is not eligible for a return of the deposit will be paid into the general revenue of the local jurisdiction. Please note that Section 32, withdrawal of nomination, has recently been amended. A candidate may withdraw their nomination at any time during the nomination period. They may also withdraw at any time within 24 hours after the close of the nomination period by filing with the returning officer a withdrawal in writing. There is no longer a requirement for there to be more candidates than offices in order for a candidate to withdraw. This could potentially lead to a higher number of insufficient nominations. For a summer village, Section 12G provides the time limit for withdrawal of nominations shall be 48 hours, and Section 32 applies except with respect to hours. Section 31, insufficient nominations, has also changed since the last election. Previously, if there were insufficient nominations, the time for receipt of nominations would be adjourned and reopened for a certain length of time, but be closed immediately when the minimum number of candidates came forward. For this election, if the number of persons nominated does not meet the number of positions required to be elected, the returning officer is required to open and accept nominations at the local jurisdiction office the next day between the hours of 10 a.m. and 12 noon for the purpose of receiving further nominations for the elected office. The returning officer shall continue to accept nominations between the hours of 10 a.m. and 12 noon for a total period of 6 days, including nomination day, but excluding Saturday, Sunday, and any holidays. In the case of a summer village, the returning officer will announce the time and place when further nominations will be received, and the period of 6 days includes Saturday and Sunday. Nominations do not close until this time period has elapsed, even if enough candidates come forward during that time. If sufficient nominations to fill the vacancies are not received, the Secretary is required to immediately notify the relevant minister. Section 34, acclamations, has also changed. If 24 hours after the close of nominations, the number of nominations received by the returning officer is equal to the number of persons required to be elected, the returning officer shall declare the persons nominated to be elected to the offices for which they filed nomination papers. The returning officer is required to immediately provide the Secretary or CAO and the relevant minister's deputy minister with written notification signed by the returning officer containing the names of the persons elected and the offices for which they were elected. In the case of municipalities, this notification will be provided to the Deputy Minister of Municipal Affairs. In the case of school boards, the notification will be provided to the Deputy Minister of Education.
Post-nomination day. Section 28, Sub 8, Candidate Nomination Information. 24 hours after the close of nominations, the returning officer shall, as soon as practicable, forward a signed statement showing the name of each nominated candidate and any information about the candidate that the candidate has consented to being disclosed to the Deputy Minister. This can be done through the elections database. Section 28, Sub 10, Posting of Names. Within 48 hours of the close of nomination day, the returning officer shall post or cause to be posted at the local jurisdiction office the names of all candidates that have been nominated and the offices for which they were nominated. A local jurisdiction intending to disclose personal information outside of the legislated timelines by posting the names of candidates at any time prior to nomination day must also consider the requirements of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, such as seeking the written consent of the candidates. Sections 28 sub 6 and 34 sub 3, retention of nomination papers. The returning officer or the secretary shall retain the nomination papers filed until the term of office to which the nomination papers relate has expired. At any time after the beginning of the nomination period, until the term of office has expired, a member of the public may request to examine the filed nomination papers during regular business hours and in the presence of the returning officer, deputy returning officer, or the secretary. Section 35, Notice of Election. If more than the required number of persons remain nominated 24 hours after nomination day has closed, the returning officer will declare that an election will be held to fill that office. The returning officer is required to give notice of the election in the prescribed form, which is Form 7, by publishing a notice at least once a week in each of the 2 weeks before Election Day. The advertising must be done in a newspaper or other publication circulating in the local jurisdiction, or notice can be mailed or delivered to every residence in the local jurisdiction at least 1 week prior to Election Day. Alternatively, if an advertising bylaw has been established under Section 606.1 of the MGA, the provisions of the bylaw may be used for the purposes of advertising the notice of election. And that concludes Module 2. Please remember to review our additional election resources online. And if you have questions about school board elections, please contact Alberta Education. Updated versions of the MGA and Local Authorities Election Act can be accessed or ordered through the King's printer, and questions about the elections database can be sent to our information services team.